strong and kicking up the hill. If you want to see a football player, go and see the Eels.
But what if they never existed? Hello everyone, it's David from the Hypothetical RL, and I'm joined for a very special episode where I'm going to bring together a bunch of Eels tragics from throughout the social media, podcasting, media landscape. You're all fantastic people. So I'm just going to go around, introduce everyone. So we've got from Progressive Rugby League, we've got the man who's known as Mr. Duncan. How are you going?
G'day. Good to be here. Thanks for having us on.
I've got Elliot from Rugby League Monthly. How are you going, Elliot?
Not bad, mate. Thanks for having me on.
We've got Mary Kay from Ladies Who League. Hi, Mary.
Hello. Thanks so much for having me.
Very much a pleasure. We have Mr. Rugby League Eye Test himself. How are you?
Thanks for having me on. I'm doing quite well, thanks. If you want to call me Andrew, that's fine.
Andrew, that's fine. And we have two people from the Electric. We have the whole of the Electric podcast. So we do have. So who are we going to talk to first?
I'll take the reins, mate. So it's Ben, and I'm very happy to be described as someone from the media and sensible. So that's great.
Well, look, I'm including myself in that, and that doesn't bode well for media if I'm in media as well. But basically, every one of you are a rugby league fan and very much a Parramatta Eels fan. So I thought I'd take this opportunity to bring us all together to talk about the Parramatta Eels because it is the 75th anniversary of the Parramatta Eels. So I thought it'd be a great chance for us to get together and chat. And in typical my hypothetical RL sort of brain, I thought, well, let's pose a question. Let's basically pose the question of what if the Eels didn't exist? What would we all be doing? You know, that sort of stuff. So I think, first of all, it's a tragic and terrible thing if they didn't exist. Although, depending on what weekend of the year it is, sometimes it'd be helpful for us. So I did like that when I did say that, a few of you said, well, at least I wouldn't be so neurotic, or at least I wouldn't have such bad memories. But I think we're here to celebrate the good and the bad throughout their whole history. So probably the best thing to do is maybe we'll just go around and everyone, and we'll go for our first question. So the first question I posed to everyone was, would you follow rugby league if there was no Parramatta Eels? I should probably ask one of you directly, shouldn't I? So maybe we'll start with Progressive Rugby League.
Thank you. Yeah, well, I definitely would. I think when I was young, I just sort of looked up to my brother, and we grew up in the Hills district of Sydney, so that was kind of close to Parramatta, but we were also very close to our cousins who lived in Ryde, so they were more Balmain fans. So I think it was more just, I think my brother would have just chosen a different team, probably Balmain, and I definitely would have just followed what my brother did. So you probably have to ask my brother, but I think, we probably would have kept following rugby league if Parramatta didn't exist. Okay,
well at least we wouldn't have lost you. That would have been fantastic. Progressive Rugby League would have been maybe slightly different if you were a Balmain fan or whatever happened to Balmain at that point. Probably not as positive, but it would be very interesting. How about you, Elliot? What about, would you actually be following rugby league?
Oh, probably. We're a sporting family. We watch anything that comes on. My grandfather grew up in what's now the Parramatta district, and kind of probably similar there in that where he grew up in Fairfield is very much on the border. Fairfield Liverpool area very much on the border of West Territory and Parramatta Territory. Would have been interesting to see had the Eels. We'll get to this a bit later, but would my grandfather have chosen to follow Wests, or would he have waited for a proper Western Sydney team like Penrith to come into the comp in the 60s, and would we be Penrith fans? But I think we'd definitely still be following rugby league.
Yeah, okay. Well, that's fair enough. What about you, Mary? What's your thoughts?
Gosh, these questions have honestly been spinning my head out for the entire week. So I suppose I don't know the answer to this question because the reason that I got into rugby league in the first place is because I wanted to spend more time with my dad and brothers on the weekend. And my dad, when he and his family first migrated out to Australia, they lived in Buller Street, which is about a 15-minute walk from the stadium. So very, very much in the heart of Parramatta. And I know that for my dad, the Eels were a really big part of his childhood and a really big sort of part of him assimilating into this country. So perhaps he would have picked another team. In my wider family, no one supports another team other than Parramatta. So I would go probably based on location. And much like many of the people on this call, perhaps he would have picked Wes. And I don't really want to think about what that world looks like.
That's a very interesting thought. We do have that secondary question as to which team you would follow. So you've some of you have given me an answer already of that. That's a very interesting question because the first one really is just, would you have followed the sport? But I think growing up in Western Sydney, like we're all basically from that area as far as I can tell. You can't really get away from rugby league, but I'm not sure if you can't get away from rugby league because Parramatta is here or just because rugby league is everywhere in Sydney. So that's sort of hard for anyone to be able to tell. Sorry. So who are we up to? Is Andrew? Eye test?
Yeah.
Okay.
So I think like everyone else, I'd definitely still be following rugby league. I am a little bit different to everyone else in that I was born in the Hunter Valley, but I moved to Sydney when I was quite young. And we lived on the upper North Shore Hills area. So Parramatta was sort of my local team, and it was probably a good time to be the local team because they were quite successful at that point. But I think had they not existed, definitely would still be into rugby league. My dad was more of a soccer player when he was young, and that was his sport, but he loved rugby league as well. Again, growing up in Newcastle, that's hard to avoid. And we watch Origin all the time, and I know how much he hated Wally Lewis and that sort of.
Can I just say this from all Parramatta fans? Didn't we all hate Wally Lewis?
Yeah.
I don't think
anyone Queenslander.
I don't think anyone liked.
He wasn't
Wally
big on the
Lewis.
Queenslanders.
No.
So
right.
I would have watched rugby league anyway. I would have gotten into it, and we'll get into the teams later. I think that would have been quite different. But I think there's no way of avoiding rugby league in my life.
Okay. All right. Well, the Mr. Professional Media himself, Mark, you want to go with whether you would have followed rugby league or not? Are you there?
Was that Ben?
Yeah, it's you. Sorry, do I get your name
sorry,
wrong?
Mate, yeah. It's Ben, but that's all right.
Ben,
mate.
sorry, I kept thinking your name was
You can
Mark.
call me Mark for the rest of the podcast.
That's all right, Ben.
if you like.
Sorry, mate. That's the first time I'll get it wrong. I'm writing it down right now. Ben.
All good, mate. All good. No, look, I'd probably follow the game still, like everybody else, but I just don't think I'd probably follow it as closely. Growing up playing soccer pretty much my whole life, I don't think the passion would be there as it is now. Living up on the Central Coast as well, haven't got a team up here, so I highly doubt I would be as engrossed in the sport as I am today. And I've got my mum to blame for dragging me into the Parramatta family because she grew up in Katoomba, and back in those days there was no Penrith Panthers, so Parramatta Eels were the closest team. So she dragged me in, and I've been long suffering ever since. But it has taught me a lot of resilience, which I've passed on to my son Fletch, who's sitting right next to me now. So, what about yourself, Fletch?
Okay, so it's Fletcher here. I probably wouldn't follow the NRL like my dad. I wouldn't follow it as much because I played Union on the Saturday, so I'd probably follow Union more than the NRL. But I would still watch it. Like I would still love to watch the Origins and the World Cups and the Tests, but it wouldn't be as consistent to watching the game.
Good on you, Fletch.
Very nice. Thanks, Fletch. Look, I didn't answer it, but I mean, for me, the reason that I follow rugby league is because, my dad and my grandfather both played, and, my grandfather played for Parramatta, so that's kind of why I follow them. But the strange kind of thing is that I think it wouldn't have mattered. I think that, rugby league's going to always be fairly strong. But I noticed, like, when Fletcher said then, talked about union, and a few of us have talked about playing, soccer. I played soccer as a kid as well. Maybe the some of the other sports might have entered our consciousness a bit more if we didn't have Parramatta around. Parramatta is such a behemoth right in that sort of central part of Sydney. So, I mean, western suburbs, who knows where that is. If you talk to the people I work with at work, it's anything west of Pittwater Road. So, it could be that West wouldn't have been as big a team. So a few of you have said West, a few have said Penrith. Is there anyone else that thinks they would have followed a different team apart from those two?
Yeah, I probably Balmain for myself, because we considered, we grew up in the hills, and our cousins who were really close to grew up in Ryde, so we considered
that's right, you're saying
Balmain and Parramatta to be like the Victoria Road kind of derby. So I can definitely see myself following Balmain. And even when I went to school, we had our sort of local knockout rugby league competition. We were in the Balmain knockout for some reason, even though I sort of grew up in the hills. I don't actually know why that is the case, but there were heaps of Balmain fans at our school as well. Maybe because of the Balmain knockout side of things, but so I'd say it would be the Tigers. But whether I would have continued being a Tigers fan once they merged, that's an interesting question, because I remember when there was all talks of mergers back in the 90s, and Parramatta were potentially merging with Penrith or potentially merging with Balmain, and I didn't like the sound of that at all. So I imagine it would have been a tricky few years, like it has been for a lot of Balmain and West supporters in that sort of transition period. So I'm not 100% sure if I'd still be following to this day, but if Parramatta weren't around, I'd say I'd be a Balmain supporter back in the day.
It's interesting. So the only other one I could think of for myself is because I did mention, my grandfather playing for Parramatta, but his brother played for Newtown. So, and my dad grew up in Newtown. So I could have been a Newtown fan, which would have been disastrous because, would have been like 2 years after I was born, they would have been out of the comp. So I may have then had to jump to another team, and God knows where we would have ended up because, there's not many slim pickings out there. So I don't know. I'm just kind of glad that Parramatta's around, because without them, I could have been like one of you guys with Wests or Balmain, or, it just doesn't. None of them feel right to me. So obviously been a Parramatta fan for so long, it just nothing else feels like it would fit. Okay.
Yeah, I think for myself, I've got a different one as well. I think for me, it probably would have been Norths, and that they would have been the next closest team to where I was. I seem to remember also, similar to having a hatred for Wally, my dad seemed to have a hatred for Manly as well. So I definitely inherited that being an Eels fan. So definitely would have been Manly. I think Norths probably would have been my choice, and that's because when I moved back to Newcastle a bit later in my sort of primary school years, and Newcastle had a team at that point, but I think I wouldn't have had. I didn't have the attachment to Newcastle that the rest of my family had, so I probably would have hung on to whatever Sydney team I picked up as a young kid. And I think it probably would have been Norths other than Parramatta, just that little bit closer to Norths than we were for western suburbs or Balmain.
Yeah, I interestingly, so I was trying to think of, like, from my perspective, who I would have chosen, and I remember I mentioned to my dad, because my dad's the whole reason, basically. I wasn't allowed to. I put some Canterbury socks on once, and my dad said, if you want to wear those, you can live outside. So, and I used to like Cronulla, and he said you can't like them. So, like, if I ever tried to change teams, he was pretty much straight on top of it. But I sort of said to him, I said, so if Parramatta didn't exist, what team would we follow? And he said to me, well, you'd probably follow Wentworthville, wouldn't you? And I was like, what do you mean? And he goes, well, if Parramatta didn't go in, then Wentworthville would have went in instead. And I'm like, well, that's kind of not the hypothetical I'm putting to you, Dad. But if it wasn't actually specific to Parramatta, if it was like Hills District or Wentworthville or something, it was just a different team, do you think that you guys would have followed that because it was just location Parramatta-wise, or was there something about the actual club that brought you guys onto it? Anyone have a thought on that?
So I think for me, as I mentioned, it was very much connected to my dad and location. Growing up in my household, we didn't have a choice. We were Parramatta fans, or we could live outside, as you said so eloquently before. And for me, it wasn't so much the location, it was connection to my family. So I feel like if my dad had picked another team, whatever that team would have been, I think I probably would have followed in his footsteps. And we are a household that only supports one team at a time.
Oh, that's fair enough. All right. I think what we'll move on to the next one. So what I asked you all to do, and you can do it on the fly if you haven't had a chance. Basically, we're going to think of sort of two moments that wouldn't have happened without them. So a positive thing and negative thing. What we might do is I might sort of ask you for one of your moments, and then if anyone else has got that, maybe we'll just chat about that one between us until we've kind of all dragged them all out, I suppose. Let's start down the other end, and we'll start with Ben, who I've remembered your name now. You can pick a positive or a negative, or even if Fletch wants to pick one. What's a major event in sort of Parramatta history or history about Parramatta that you think would have been, it would have been a shame if it didn't happen?
Okay, so I'll take over here. I'll go for a negative. It's this year, which it's kind of a positive but kind of a negative. You probably would have had to go. Penrith would have lost only one game, which would have been no fun for the rest of the NRL trying to pick a grand final winner. But they would have only lost one game this year with the Melbourne loss. But yeah, it would have just been boring to see only one team beating Penrith.
But I think the best thing about that, Fletch, is when they lose to someone else and don't make the grand final, we could all laugh at them.
True.
Yeah.
I thought what you were going to say there, Fletch. I thought you were going to say it'd be a shame that Sean Lane couldn't run around at CommBank.
He's just shaking his head in disgust that you've mentioned Sean. He's growing on him this year, that's for sure.
That's fair enough. Sorry, Ben, you were saying?
Yeah. I was going to say probably a positive, the Parramatta Stadium upgrade. That wouldn't have happened. Cumberland Oval would probably still be standing, potentially, and wouldn't have the facility in the Parramatta CBD that we have at the moment. It's probably one positive out of the club.
Yeah,
sure.
Well, definitely no one would have been there to burn the Cumberland Oval grandstand down. So they can all thank us for that.
Exactly right. I just hope CommBank Stadium's flame-proof this year.
You're getting too excited for a Parramatta fan. I don't like this.
I know, way too excited.
Agree. Let's disconnect him from the call. Off.
We can't be too positive. It has been 75 years of mostly pain, so we've got to be careful.
100%, but we've got to enjoy it while we can.
All right. Well, we'll go back around the reverse order. So we've done sort of your 2-1s there, guys. Andrew, what do you think?
Yeah, I mean, for me, the positive is because it's one of my earliest football memories. Is the '86 grand final, and I don't have a lot of memories of it. I remember a couple of tackles and a few things, and seeing Cronin and Price at the end of the game, and just the outpouring of emotion. And I think it's a great finish to that era, and seeing how well received everyone was, and how the club handled that success. I think was a great situation, and it'd be a shame not to have had it. I think that was, and it sort of ties back to the picking a team, as I think it also helped not only being close to Parramatta, is that they also were quite successful just before I was born and growing up as a kid. So I think that era, and topping it off with the storylines from the '86 grand final, I think that would be my big positive.
Yeah, and like if that doesn't happen, we'll get to that, because that's one of our questions coming up about who takes all our titles and things like that. But I might be the oldest one here, but born in 1980, so I mean I was alive for all of them. A lot of you weren't actually around, so some of you haven't actually never seen them win anything or anything in grand finals. So
I'm of a similar vintage, so Yeah, that's like the earliest memory I have. And apparently, my dad took me to a game in '86 at Parramatta Stadium,
Oh,
one of the
okay.
first games I think after it opened. So I don't recall any of this, but a couple of seconds of the grand final I do remember. So yeah, it's that was probably a big influence in my choice.
And I suppose without those sort of storylines, you don't get. I mean, there's so many iconic moments in the '80s that without Parramatta don't happen. And that '86 one, like you said, is the culmination of that. So without
Yeah.
without Parramatta around, there's not that statue of Ray Price outside of Cumberland Oval, which is now a major stadium, and there's not that sort of that glory era. Like, a lot of people love the '80s, and that's like one of the epitomes of the '80s is that grand final. So,
And I think also as well, for me, watching that team is, as a kid, I was just mesmerised by how great Peter Sterling was. And when I started playing footy later in my juniors, all I wanted to do was be Peter Sterling. And when he retired, I remember being extremely upset as a kid, not understanding that he'd been beaten up and had bad shoulder and whatever else was an issue. But seeing him run around and how electrifying he was as a player, along with the success, yeah, that played a big part in it.
yep, okay.
Yeah, I felt
Yeah.
Oh, sorry, Dave.
No, you go.
Yeah. I was just going to add that I was born in '83, so I've been alive for 2 grand final victories, but don't have sort of consciousness of that period. So I feel a bit ripped off, to be honest. But yeah, and Peter Sterling as well. I feel a bit ripped off that I don't really remember Peter Sterling or Brett Kenny at their best. I just kind of remember them at the tail end of their careers, and
Yeah,
like
I
you, Andrew.
agree.
Yeah, like you, Andrew. I remember being really upset when Peter Sterling retired with the shoulder injury, and Brett Kenny kind of had a couple of flat years to end his career with a team that was really struggling. So so that's kind of my sort of angle on that particular period. Just missed it.
Yeah. I mean, both myself and Andrew are probably still fairly young. I mean, I don't remember '86 at all. I've only ever watched it on a replay. I don't remember watching it live. I only remember the.
It's funny I mentioned.
Yeah.
I remember '86. I couldn't tell you anything from '87 to '89 though. Sort of '90 is sort of where I start getting the rest of my Eels memories. But for some reason that little bit of '86 sticks. I know it's probably a good time to start to not remember, although the mid '90s weren't much better. But I do have a couple of memories of '86. But yeah, I have nothing in between, so I don't know why it's stuck there.
It's selective memory, I think. I think that's what that is.
Yeah, selective repression. Yeah, I think so.
Yeah, I'm very much the same as Andrew. I was born in '79, and only remember seconds of just little snippets of the '86 grand final. I remember Mum wore blue and gold earrings, but that's about it. That's about all I can remember from that time.
All right. Well, mate, we might move to Mary. Have you got a positive or a negative thing? Well, don't giggle like that. That worries me.
Which do you want, the positive
whichever
or the
one
negative?
you want. We can make ourselves feel better that it never happened, or we can be upset that it didn't happen.
Let's start with the negative. So I was born in 1989, so I absolutely missed all of the 80s. And my first season that I can really, really remember is 1998. And I think I've shared this story a number of times, but this was back in the day where finals were delayed on Channel 9. And for some reason, I must have been at school on the Sunday for an extracurricular activity, and it was the day that the Eels were playing the Bulldogs. Jumped in the car, turned on ABC Grandstand, and with 20 minutes to go, Parramatta were leading 18 points to 2. I walked into the house. Dad was watching the delayed coverage. I said, "Dad, don't worry, we've got this." Hurled up into his arms to watch the last 20 minutes. And I'm not going to go into detail as to what happened in those 20 minutes because we'll all need more therapy than we already need. But suffice to say, at the end of that 20 minutes, I remember my dad getting up and walking out and trying to get himself hit by a car. We live in a cul-de-sac. We lived in a cul-de-sac at that point, so he wasn't successful, thankfully. But that was my first real introduction into being a Parramatta fan. And it's funny, I heard a little bit of confidence on Friday night. I'm never confident. I never feel safe. Parramatta have to be up by 30 for me to even start feeling slightly relaxed. And I feel like some of that might stem back to that first season.
Well,
Yeah, if I was going to bring up a negative, that would have been that's the one.
Yeah, I was going to say.
Trumps almost all others. There's only one other one that hurts as much as that one. But yeah, that is the key one for me. And I never, my mates still to this day will always bring it up.
Yeah, that was an absolute killer. I was exactly the same, Mary. As soon as it went to extra time, I raced out to my car and put the radio on, and heard that they lost, and then went back in and in the days of the VHS, watched a replay of a WWF pay-per-view. Just put it straight on and didn't even watch the end of the game.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah. I was going to mention 98 as well. Let's not go into detail, of course, as you said, Mary, but suffice to say, without Parramatta, I wouldn't have known that Craig Polamatta could drop kick a football 50 metres. Now, I know he didn't actually kick that drop goal right at full time, but whenever I see someone going for a drop goal from that far out, it sort of gives me the shivers. So that was a moment that I will never forget.
So how many of you? I know Mary has, because I made her do it for a podcast. But how many of you have watched back the replay of that '98 preliminary final?
Never.
No.
Not once.
Never.
I think I might have watched the clip.
Shiver down my spine just even thinking about it. I can't.
I've watched the clip of the incident, and that I went back once or twice more, just to see if it was as I remembered it, and that was painful enough.
Well, Mary and I for a podcast episode when I had her on, we watched it. My wife jokingly put some tissues in front of me, but I think I did need it by the end. But in that one we said, oh, good, this never happened. But if Parramatta never existed, then we never had to go through that. So maybe that's a positive, that we wouldn't have had to have, watched the most diabolical performance of all time by a single player like that. I thought that we'd been really tough on him, and when I watched that replay back, I don't think we were hard enough on how bad that last 10 minutes was. I just can't believe that. But the best thing is that if that never happened, then we didn't... Well, there's two things here. If it never happened, we don't have to worry about it. But with that happening, I think that made us stronger. It made us know that we were never safe, and that we never got arrogant. So I don't think Parramatta fans can ever be arrogant.
Well, I mean, the one positive you could say is that I really doubt it can get any worse than that. So, it's only uphill or a plateau from there. Surely can't go downhill from that.
I would hope not. Do you want to make us feel better, Mary? You want to give us the positive one?
Yeah, there are a couple. Look, I don't think I would have started Ladies Who League without the Parramatta Eels, so that's a very positive one for me. But if I think back over recent history, watching our NRLW team come to life and being at their very first game up in Newcastle last year when Matty Studden kicked that field goal to win the game was really special. And I suppose for me growing up, rugby league was always a sport for boys, and I never ever thought about the possibility of women playing. So to see our club become whole and to see those female athletes welcomed so warmly into our club has been something really, really special for me personally.
Yeah, I've loved the NRLW, and it's funny for me in a way because I can't watch it, and I'm not a very positive fan ever, and I see a team in blue and gold, and it doesn't matter if it's the men's NRL, it's the women's NRL, it's a reserve grade or New South Wales Cup or Jersey Flag or anything. I'm always very critical of them, and so I hope that when I do that online that no one thinks that I'm being a real, a-hole or anything, but I just want them to win. I just want this blue and gold team to win, and, we've watched them, this season I've been so frustrated because I know they're good enough to win a game, and they've got to win one soon, and it's just, I feel like a West Tigers fan, and it's just not right. It can't be that way, so... But I've loved some of the performances, some of the individual performances. I think I sent you guys something about, I do have a bit of a, not a Sean Lane-esque feeling, but I've got an Ellie Johnson, I don't know, something about her I really like. I love the effort she puts in every time. So I would really miss that if I didn't have a team to support there.
Yeah, I reckon that's a great shout from Mary. We went up to that first game as well, Mary, and when we were driving up, I was thinking, I'm not sure how much I'll get into this game today. And I reckon within 2 minutes of listening to the Newcastle crowd, I reckon I was yelling louder than what I do at a normal NRL game. It was fantastic.
That's
awesome.
so great. That's so great.
They can keep their 3-syllable chant all they want. It was just great to see us get that victory in the first game.
All right, well, we might go across to Elliot. Have you got a positive or a negative that wouldn't have happened without Parramatta?
Yeah, well, there's plenty of negatives to choose from.
Don't be like that.
I'm probably one of the younger ones here. I was born mid-90s, so I was born just before the Super League War. So unfortunately, my earliest memory is playing backyard footy at half-time during the VO1 Grand Final. We're on holidays up north on mid-north coast, like we're most years in September. And I remember my dad coming out and grabbing me just after half time because he started to put some points on, and he's like, "Come back on," so come inside, and we ended up falling just short. But kind of aside from that, 2005 was probably the more disappointing one. It was the first season that Dad and I went to every single home game that year. We barely missed one since. And it was the season that convinced us to become members. But after going to every single game that season, we went on holidays to Europe during the finals. So obviously, internet, you've got to find an internet cafe. There's no live streaming. There's no social media. There's nothing. Dad would get a text from Pa, his dad, with the score updates during the finals. So he sends the text, that we've thrashed Manly the first week. We've got the week off. So we're on holidays. We got 2 weeks later. We know we're playing the Cowboys, and Dad's like, we should have this or something. So we've gone off to the touristy thing. Mary, I think we're actually in Greece. My memory serves me correct. And we're standing in some bloody museum looking at marble statues. And Dad gets a text from Pa, and it's the Cowboys score, and he just walks out.
Oh.
And so you've got this giant 6 foot tall white Australian guy who's just you can't miss him. Just obviously very disappointed and just turned around and walked out of the museum. And then he told me a bit later that we've got beaten 29-0. And I think he's actually sat down and watched the game. I don't know why he did it. But Pa, being Pa, had taped finals games for us. And I think Dad's watched it. I've never watched it. I similar to 98, I've never watched the highlights. I'd go to the gym and they'd have Fox League on, and Fox League would put the 98 preliminary final up, and I'd literally walk away from whatever I was doing near that screen so I didn't have to watch it. But it's the same with 05. I mean, the wooden spoons were disappointing, but you kind of accept it. You get to that point, you go, oh, we're winning that this year, that's great. Let's just hope this ends. But the 2005 and 2001, there's so much hope, and then you've got the major letdown. But on both occasions, because the side doesn't start well at all, which is.
I think it's funny you mentioned that you found 05 more disappointing than 01. I mean, maybe it was because I had more hope in 01. I find 01 incredibly disappointing, and then I guess because of that disappointment, 05 didn't hit me as hard. It's like that sort of cynicism had crept in. It's like, well, I've seen 98, I've seen 2001, it's now 2005. It's going to happen again. I can't. So that's, I guess, where my negativities come in, and I can't accept a win until it's the 80th minute and they're actually ahead on the scoreboard. So I find it interesting how people, how different fans have different thoughts on the different disappointments in the Eels history.
That's interesting. I was just going to say, it's interesting which one, because we all find there's so many of these, like we all just said, and I wonder which one does actually hurt us the most. Like, which one psychologically hurts us the most. I don't know why. Maybe it's because it's closer. I think 09 hurts me the most. Only because I think we could have stole one. Because we weren't the best team that year. And I feel like we did everything. We had the fairy tale run. And it felt like I was watching a sports movie where, the team that was down and out couldn't play, and just decided to play for each other, and then all of a sudden, they get right away at the end, and then the bad guys win. Like I have nothing really against Newcastle. The Cowboys not really, but I don't like Melbourne, and I feel like they're the bad guys. You know what I mean? I feel like you're down at the end, and the one team that that stops us. I mean, it could have been worse. It could have been Manly. I think if Manly had beaten us in 09, everyone would hate that.
It's funny, actually, because for me, '09 is the one that hurts the least. For me, Parramatta was living
agreed.
on borrowed time that year, and it was magic. Like that, I don't want to say his name, actually, but the Jared Hayne run towards the back end of that year was magic. And every week we progressed, I almost felt like it was a little bit of a gift. And I suppose for me, the losses that hurt the most are always the ones when I know that the team could have done more. So I'll give another example. When we exited the finals last year and lost that game to Penrith, it was actually the most comfortable I've been after a week 2 loss in several years, because I couldn't have asked any more of that team. They left it all out on the field, and I feel like as fans, that's all we can really ask for.
Yeah, I think with 09, the thing...
They didn't take it that well.
So I was just going to say about 09, I think the thing that gives me comfort, sort of like Mary, like that year, they weren't expected to do much. And as I said, living on borrowed time every week, you weren't expecting it. And in the end, the only thing that beat them was a team that was horrifically cheating the salary cap. So to me, like, even though they're not classed as the premiership winners that year, the run that they went on and the performance they put on, that was, I'm just as proud of that as almost as anything in my Eels fandom history.
Yeah, I was going to say 09 for me was my positive memory that I was going to add. Really, the personal thing, like I used to go to the games with a mate of mine for so many years, and we saw so many sort of, mediocre years in front of mediocre crowds. And then all of a sudden we go on this run and we get to the prelim and there's 75,000 people there. We're just looking at each other saying, how on earth is this real? So it just felt like a surreal moment. And we won that game against the Bulldogs in front of 75,000 people. A really amazing night, an amazing experience. And yeah, we did lose against the Storm the next week. And of course they were subsequently found to be cheating that year. But even so, I don't personally hate the Storm, and it doesn't hit me too hard because of those reasons I think everyone's articulated so well.
Yeah, so 09 was going to be one of my positives. For a lot of what's been touched on, but also I was at high school at that point in time, and it was the only time, basically during my time at high school, that the Eels made the finals. And I've got a lot of friends at school who are Manly fans, Roosters fans, Bulldogs fans, even a Melbourne fan, Broncos fans. So growing up, I'm watching all those guys win premierships, playing grand finals, and to cop it every Monday when you come to school because your side's lost is just, it's so deflating. But then to have that run of 7 consecutive wins, and then okay, we didn't quite win the premiership, and I still copped it that following weekend. But to have that basically 10 weeks of us being the fairy tale of the competition, because it wasn't just that, it was obviously a lot of us live around the Parramatta area. It's like the entire side picked the community up and brought them along. Like if you went into Parramatta, there were blue and gold banners everywhere. The shop fronts had all the Parramatta flags and pictures and stuff out the front. And obviously I wasn't around in the 80s, and I've been told that the 80s it was a similar thing. Everyone was proud to be a Parramatta fan. And that's what it felt like in 09. And because the other kind of positive I wanted to mention as well was the opening of the new stadium in 2019. So I've spoken to a few people on this. So, my grandfather started supporting the club in the 50s, so he started watching games at Cumberland Oval, and then he'd bring my dad and my uncle along in the 70s and the 80s, and they were there for the Parramatta Stadium when it opened, and Pa's health was going downhill in 2019. And prior to that, because of his health, he hadn't been able to go to games because he couldn't get access to ANZ Stadium. There wasn't great disabled access to the old stadium, so when the new stadium came along, I said, look, you've got to come. And, you'll be able to sit near us and they'll have disabled facilities. So he said, okay, I'll come. And so obviously, we turn up, we blow the Tigers off the park. It's a fantastic match. And that ended up being the final game that he ever went to. He died about 2 months later. But for that memory to be there, that the last game I get to go with, to the football with my grandfather, we play like that at the new stadium, which has kind of given me a story to tell my kids when they're older. But it also meant that I was discussing this actually with Phil Sim, who's the Leagues Club board member and the former owner of One Ideal. And his point was that sport, and particularly rugby league, it becomes a very generational thing, and it's unique in its ability to connect generations. You can try and connect over music or something like that, but if the band retires, that's it. They don't make any more music. If the band breaks up, they don't make any more music. But he said sports is this continuous thing where, your granddad can watch the team in the 60s, and they're the same team in the 2020s. They're wearing the same colours. They might be different players, but you get to make those memories again. And so that's kind of been the real thing for me, is to have that 3 generations now. I've got 2 boys, and one of them's been to a game this year. Unfortunately, it was the field goal loss to the Tigers. That was his first experience at the club, so I figured I'd start him early with the disappointment of watching the side get beaten in a game they should win. But, to hopefully look forward to my boys then also getting involved in rugby league is something I'm looking forward to.
Oh, that's great. We might... who are we up to? I think we were just doing you, Elliot. So, who we got left? Progressive. We have you left. I keep forgetting your actual name and your real name. So
yeah, John O. Peter Duncan is the name.
We'll call you John.
Yeah, look. So I think I've already said mine, but the best was 2009.
Okay.
And then the Craig Bollamount for the worst.
All right, fair enough. Okay, well we've spent a bit of time on that, so let's move on to the next one. So, I'm presuming you all have a favourite NRL player or favourite Parramatta Eels player. Sorry, it doesn't really matter from what decade they are, but maybe we'll just go through and have a chat about some of our favourite players that played for Parramatta and maybe where they would have played if they didn't play for Parramatta. I'll go back to you, Jono. Do you want to? Who is your favourite Parramatta player?
Well, growing up when I was a little kid, I used to have a poster of the Parramatta Eels. I guess it was from the newspaper or Big League or Rugby League Week. I'm not 100% sure, but I used to stare at it and see all the players. It must have been from the late 80s when I would have been like 6 or 7, I guess. And I just remember Danny Krankovic was my favourite player. I don't really know why. There were barely any Parramatta games on TV back then. I think I just liked the name, Danny Krankovic. And he looked like a kind of a little fella like me. And, I don't know. He became my favourite player for those few years while he was in the team. We were quite bad back then. And from memory, he was a utility bench player. So who would he have played for if Parramatta didn't exist? Look, he may not have got a start elsewhere, to be honest.
That's true.
That might be the answer. But no, he was my favourite player. And not that I remember watching him play much at all, because obviously it wasn't on TV much back then. But yeah, Danny Krankovic.
See, Danny Krankovic is in the era that I remember because I really started to go to games sort of around 1990. That was like when I started going. So I was about 10. I didn't actually get to go much before that. And so Danny Krankovic was one of the ones who, because, I mean, being the nut that I am, we would go and watch President's Cup, reserve grade and first grade. So I probably saw him play a lot. And the Danny Krankovic memory that I always have is that his arms moved faster than his legs. So, I mean, if he actually turned himself upside down, he might have been a faster runner. But he had a very strange action. But look, I feel like he may have struggled to come up anywhere else. He got to struggle to make it in that Parramatta team. He may have ended up somewhere like the Gold Coast or West or something like that. But yeah. Definitely a one from left field there, Danny Krankovic. I mean, you could have gone... I remember my sister loved a guy called Robert Muchmore because she thought he was cute. And she actually was... It was a radio competition came up probably around that same time, around the sort of 1990 to 3 or so, that sort of time. And apparently, like my dad kind of rang through and got through to, I don't know how it worked, but it was one of these things where you'd win like one day, and then all the people who won would go into like a prize pool, and they would get the jersey of their favourite player. And so my sister made them put Robert Muchmore down, and at the time he was playing President's Cup. So my dad's like, what are they going to do? Are they going to give me like jersey number 23 or something? Like, I don't know what they're going to do with that. I don't know what number it was.
Yeah.
But
No, I guess when I got a bit older in like the early 90s, I guess my favourite players were Scott Mahon and Dave Woods. I remember Dave Woods. He was a really good centre, but he was always injured. But I remember one day, I can't remember which season it was, it might have been 1990, I guess, or maybe it was 94. He made the Kangaroos train-on squad, which I was so excited as a Parramatta fan. I didn't actually know what train-on squad meant. Like, what are you training on? I didn't understand the terminology, but I knew it was pretty good. But then he didn't actually play for them, so I'm like, what is a train-on? Where was he? Yeah, anyway, I didn't understand what the terminology was at the time. But, yeah, David Woods was a what could have been story, I guess.
Yeah, I think we were always convinced that he had one leg longer than the other because he only wanted to tackle people on one side as well. So that was the old trope that we used to talk about in the stands. I'll go back the other way. So Elliot, favourite Eels player, and where do you think they would have played?
Well, I had two. Jamie Lyon answers his own question because he pissed off the Manly via England.
But he wouldn't have had to go to St Helens. He would have just left and gone straight to Manly, or would he have started?
He could have gone straight with Crusher. He could have straight from Weewar with Crusher to the Northern Beaches. But so my real favourite player growing up was Nathan Hindmarsh. And if you read his book, you'd kind of know that it would be an interesting place of where he would have ended up because he wasn't a big rugby league follower, but he said he didn't mind the Bulldogs. He was from the Southern Highlands, which probably would have meant St George may have been interested in him. But the other interesting part is he only ended up at Parramatta because the Rabbitohs, I think, or Parramatta sent a scout to look at Scott Geddes, who was in the same team as him. So he could have ended up at Souths as well. Would have been an interesting thing had Parramatta not taken a punt on him or the club not existed. He very well could have ended up South Sydney legend, which still would have resulted in the same number of trophies in the end.
He would have had a tough time at South because the time. Well, South didn't exist when he for a while in his first couple of years. So yeah, it would have been really.
Oh, he came through the grades in 97, 98. So yeah, he may have only had a season and might have moved on to a more stable club. In the end, he may have very well have ended up at Bulldogs.
Well, he could have ended up at the Roosters too, because a lot of South players went that way as well. So
that's true. Yeah,
he could be a very hated figure. Him and the Fletch, not the Fletch on this call, may have actually played for the same club.
Oh, could you imagine that?
Yeah, I know. Two Roosters people, and then Brad Fittler on the commentary as well. Geez, that NRL commentary on Channel 9 would be terrible. Or Foxtel they're on, aren't they? So that'd be pretty bad.
Yeah, it'd just be worse.
Mary, who's your favourite Eels player, and where do you think they would have played without Parramatta?
I have too many favourite Eels players. My first ever, maybe that's the easiest way to do it, my first ever favourite Parramatta Eels player was Clinton Schifofsky. I thought he was pretty cute back in the day. I don't know where he would have played. I know he spent some time at Canberra, so I wonder whether he would have ended up there. But my understanding is he actually lives up in Brisbane now, so potentially he would have gone up there home.
Yeah, I think he played for the Crushers as well.
He did. He started off with them, and then he came down to play with Parramatta. So he may not have left the Crushers, but I think he had to leave them because they were out of the comp. So, who knows where he would have gone. It would have been very interesting.
I think he ended his career in rugby union playing for the Queensland Reds.
Yeah, I seem to remember that. I mean, once someone joins rugby, I just forget about them. But yeah, I seem to remember that.
Yeah, well, they're dead to rugby league by then anyway.
It's interesting you say...
Unless they come back.
It's interesting you say Clinton Schifofsky because my wife, when we talk about rugby league players, she's like, oh, they're all unattractive and whatever, except for Clinton Schifofsky, Nathan Hindmarsh, and Eric Groth Jr. And I was like, Okay, fair enough. I'll take that.
Okay.
That's her. That's obviously her niche. I don't know what it is. She finds the rest of them repulsive, but those three are okay. So you might have
I won't
something.
give you the rest of my list.
Yeah.
I won't give you the rest of my list.
Well, you might have something in common, which is good. That's at least I know she's
something.
not completely weird. Yeah. Andrew, who's your favourite Eels player, and where do you think they would have gone?
If you'd asked me 5 years ago, I would have had a different choice, but I'm going to choose to redact my choice now because it no longer is the case.
Okay, we don't need to say any more about that. I know what you're talking about.
I don't want to say any more about it. So that's wiped from memory. So a couple of choices. In the 90s when I was growing up, my favourite Eels player during the downtimes was Chris Lawler.
Oh,
and
yes.
I was absolutely filthy with Brian Smith. That not only did he put him on the wing, but I think he wasn't even kicking goals at one point. I know we had like John Simon and Ian Heron, or I can't remember who it was. It was kicking goals at some point, and they were kicking at a horrible rate. I know Lawler wasn't a fantastic player, but he's a pretty good player, and reasonable player, and he's a good goal kicker. So I hated Brian Smith for how he treated him. The issue is I don't know where else he would have played. I know he went to the Gold Coast afterwards, and I think he might have played a bit of Q Cup afterwards. So I guess he might have some Queensland background. Other than that, my two other favourites were both from the 09 team. Luke Burt, who actually played the same junior club as me in Newcastle. So I think he probably would have ended up at the Knights, maybe. So that's and the other one, my all-time favourite Eel now is Felipe Mateo, and I think he probably might have ended up at the Warriors, which he ended up in anyway. I think he played for Westfield Sports High, so he might have ended up at the Dogs or maybe the Tigers as well. But I think Warriors probably would have been his spot, given he ended up there in the end. But he's definitely my all-time favourite Eel now, given the circumstances around some other people.
I mean, who doesn't love a good lock who can offload? Like, I mean, Jim Dimmick,
absolutely,
Felipe Mateo. It's so much fun. And I always love Felipe Mateo. There was I say his name really badly then, but there was a season there before he made first grade, before a few of them made first grade, where the forward pack for the reserve grade team had Felipe Mateo at lock, had Wella Haraki at one back rower, Zeb Taylor as the other back rower. The front row had Tim Manor and Josh Cordoba, something like that. And I think the halfback was Blake Green, and it might have been Maloney as the 5'8" or something like that. It was the most unbelievable team that you ever could put together, of just like guys that had so much potential that could have been huge for Parramatta. And a few of them worked out, obviously, but a few of them ended up going elsewhere and becoming big stars. So
I think the thing you mentioned about that ball playing lock with Mateo is that I don't think I've ever seen a player whose ability to throw a pass that was either the absolute worst pass of all time or the absolute best pass of all time. You never knew which one was coming, and I think that was the excitement of watching him play. Is that you were either going to get the best pass you could ever find, or an absolutely horrific pass that you never should have thrown. Yeah,
fair enough. Okay, we'll go to Ben and Fletch. So you can have an answer each, but who favourite Eels player, and where do you think they would have played if they no Eels?
So it's Fletcher here. I'm obviously going a player from the last 4 years, because that's when I got into NRL. But it's Mitch Moses. I think he probably would have. He started his juniors at Parramatta, but he went to the Tigers. He probably would have ended up there, stayed there, and probably ruined his career. But he wouldn't. Yeah, he wouldn't be. He wouldn't have debuted for New South Wales or Lebanon, playing in a West Tigers outfit with Luke Brooks.
Fletch is my favourite person on this call. You're the best, Fletch. Next time it's just for you.
He's not afraid to.
His honesty is amazing.
Don't forget us.
It's very refreshing.
Should see him with a few Coke Zeros under his belt at a game. Quite violent.
Sorry, Fletch, I interrupted you. Keep going.
No, it's fine. I'll pass over to Dan.
My favourite player, probably Hindy, for sure. He probably would have maybe ended up at the Dogs. I think he supported the Dogs when he was younger, so that would have been heartbreaking seeing him in blue and white. But Mary, throwing back to you, the jersey that I wear to every game has actually got a faded number 1 on the back, and you're not going to believe why I put the number 1 on the back.
Stop it.
100%.
Wow.
Always used to get round the first offender every single time. That's what made him one of my favourites. So
I can't believe how popular he is. Clint would love this. This is great. Does
There you
anyone
go.
want to call like Todd Lowry? Can I interest anyone in the comment section about him?
There's like an auction happening here. I'll tell you very much that Clint Szyfkowski was one of my favourites too, and I still maintain that the 2000 Eels were better than 2001 Eels because Clint Szyfkowski was the fullback. I still reckon they were a better team. I think they should have won. I think when we talk about disappointments, we talk about 2001. I feel like 2000 is almost more disappointing to me because I reckon we beat the Broncos in the prelim. We would have steamrolled whoever we were playing because the other side of the draw, Newcastle and Roosters, they weren't any good. So we had that one. We just had to beat Brisbane. That's all we had to do.
Yeah, and the only other shout out I'll give is Jim Dimmick as well, purely because of I think he got into a fight with someone from North one night, and it came over as clear as anything on the ref's mic. The ref said, "Jim, you were the aggressor," and he replied, "Of course I was. I effing smashed him."
Yeah, that's a good one. Wasn't that a North Sydney fight? We played North Sydney final or something. I think that's what that was.
I think it might have been, yeah. But I still remember watching it at Gosford RSL, and it came over as clear as day. And I thought, Jim Dimmick, you've just made your way into my heart, mate. So yeah, another one of my favourites.
No one's really mentioned Peter Sterling as their favourite player, but so I'm gonna pick him. I mean, if you asked me who my favourite player is all time, he probably is. But because I saw Luke Burt more recently, I probably like him, as well. Like I've said I think I was talking with Elliot a while back about, I love players who didn't have the physical, like they weren't huge guys, but they were smart. So I always love smart players, and that's why I kind of love Gutherson at the moment, because I think he's a really smart footballer too, and that's what we need. We need smart footballers. So Peter Sterling was 3 players ahead of everyone else on the field. So I used to run around as like a 4-year-old kid in the background, just calling myself David Sterling and kicking the ball to myself and scoring tries, just diving in the grass where the try line was in my backyard. And the thing about him is that he was obviously brought up, and brought into through Fairfield Patrician to come play for Parramatta. I don't know who we would have played with. I heard that he was a Manly fan as a kid, so that would have been the travesties of all travesties if Parramatta didn't exist and that 80s Manly team had Cliff Lyons and Peter Sterling. Like, it would have been... I think they would have been the most hated team because they just would have been the best team you'd ever seen. So,
David, am I allowed to just name drop a couple more of my favourite players just so it's on the record?
Let's talk about our players. I love talking about Parramatta players. We could do this for another hour and a half.
So I'll mention just a couple. So obviously Clinton Szyfkowski was my first love. Loved him so much. Ben Smith, Tim Smith, the Keating brothers, Todd Lowry, Gutho absolutely, and Reggie is a really, really big favourite of mine at the moment. I'm sure I've left others out, but they're some of my favourites, and you probably can all gather a theme. I love an underdog and to cheer for the players that no one else is cheering for.
Mary, speaking of underdogs, so obviously Matt had that. Matt Keating injured his thumb, I think. His dog bit him. And he broke his thumb. There's a funny story is actually, I grew up in the same area as the Keating brothers. Didn't know them, but I actually had dinner next to him not long after that had happened. It's just a coincidence. We were both in the same restaurant. And I sat down near him, and I said to my dad, I said, I think that's Matt Keating. He's like, no, it's not. And then I saw he picked his hand up, he put it on the table, and it was splintered. Like, it had the cast on it. And I went, no, that's Matt Keating. Just of all places, we walked to the same Vietnamese restaurant, and I didn't mention anything because he's obviously out with his partner and stuff. I'm not going to say anything. He's obviously just gone out for a quiet dinner. He doesn't need a Parramatta fan buzzing. But I just went of all the places to have bumped into a Parramatta player I did not expect at a Vietnamese restaurant on like a Thursday night or something.
Oh, and sorry, everyone. I had to say as well, my biggest of all, the biggest crush that I had when I was in year 12, Tim Smith. Did I say him?
Yeah, you said Tim Smith. That's okay.
Oh, good. All right. Okay. I just wanted
I
to
think-
clarify. He
I think
had to
everyone-
be on it because he was all
Yeah.
over my year 11 economics book.
I think Tim Smith, everyone loved him for about a year, and then everyone went off him real quick. But I don't think that was his fault. I still remember going to Parramatta Stadium, and there was a lady that sat behind me, and look, it was annoying because she seemed to just listen to certain parts of the media and just yell certain things. Like, as soon as that Tim Smith incident where apparently he turned up to a training session, like on his skateboard or something or whatever, she just, for the whole rest of the year, just every time he got near the ball, would just yell out something like, "Oh, just get on your skateboard, Tim." And it was like, I don't know. Everyone sort of turned on him so quickly, but yeah, I don't know. He was so talented and just such a. I mean, maybe if he had been in another club, maybe the second year syndrome wouldn't hit him so hard. But yeah, I don't know. All right. Is there any? I mean, I could list a whole team of guys from 1992 and 93 that I loved as well. But we'll move on, because if I start talking about Martin Seal and Keith Blackett, then you guys are going to be like, "What's going on here?" Okay, so we've got that one. Now, here's a very important one. So obviously, without Parramatta, 81 to 83 and 86, we couldn't win. So I'll probably just go around to you guys again. Maybe we'll start with you, Jono. You can give me 4 different teams, or you can say the same 4 teams, or maybe a combination of it would have won those years. But who do you think would have been... Well, basically what I'm asking is, who do you think would have kind of dominated the early 80s to the mid-80s?
Yeah, that's a really hard one. Obviously, I'll defer to the people who were kind of conscious back then and alive and have memories to who would have, how the sort of finals unfolded and all that sort of thing. In 81, as someone who's sort of fallen in with the Newtown Jets, I'd like to think that they would have won that, and then maybe, who knows, it might have been a sliding doors moment for them to survive and hopefully, perhaps thrive into the 80s, but also has the Tommy factor as well that would have been quite romantic. Obviously, Canterbury were a pretty dominant team in the 80s as well. I know we beat Manly in 82 and 83, but as long as Canterbury wouldn't have won one of those 81, 82, 83, then that would make me satisfied, because my cousin is a big Canterbury fan, and we still to this day fight about who was the team of the 80s, and he thinks because Canterbury I think they won in 1980, they won in 84 was it, and then 85 maybe, and then 88.
And 88.
Yeah, so it sort of crosses like most of the decade, and we kind of won between 81 and 86. He thinks Canterbury were the team of the decade. So anyway, as long as it wasn't Canterbury, then I'm happy for anyone else to have won those titles.
Okay, that's cool. Elliot, what do you think? Are you there? Oh, yeah, there you are.
Sorry.
That's all right.
Yeah. No, I agree with the Newtown thing. I think part of that is just a bit of romanticism giving Tommy Rodonigus premiership. But the point about them possibly sticking around longer is also pretty interesting. That they might have got some more sponsors, some more funding to keep the club afloat, some more interest from supporters as well, which would have kept them going for a bit longer. But in saying that, I think a similar thing is I think Manly probably win those next two premierships. It's hard to go past them in that regard. And then you've got the Bulldogs in 86. I mean, it's a trial-loss grand final. You can hardly split the two sides. I don't think there's any other team in that competition who would have beaten the Bulldogs, considering they were premiers the season before that as well. I can't see anyone really getting over the Bulldogs that year. But Manly 82-83 as well. They were still a very good side that has happened to run to us on those 2 grand finals.
Very true. Do you have any thoughts, Mary? Anyone other than Manly, Canterbury, Newtown?
Probably not. I mean, I wasn't even born, so it was a little bit before my time. So I'll just defer to the other experts on the line.
No, that's fine. Andrew, have you got anyone else you want to throw in there that might have had a chance in
No,
those years?
it's a mainly early '80s, Dogs mid '80s. So I think, again, the '81 Newtown team was probably the most interesting, yeah, as I said, sliding doors moment. Whether or not they make it if the Eels aren't there, but otherwise, yeah, agree with everyone else.
Okay, cool. What about you, Ben? You got any idea?
Yeah, echo everything that everyone else has said, David. We've gone everyone they played in the grand final, figuring that if Parramatta weren't there, they would have won the comp. Similar to if the Storm didn't rot the cap in '09, we would have won the comp. So we went down that road.
Fair enough. Well, I mean, just thinking back over that, so if it had gone Newtown, Manly, Manly, Canterbury, 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 Manly, wouldn't that have been one of the most awful times of rugby league history, just having Canterbury and Manly win it all the time?
Yes.
Like,
Yeah,
painful.
Oh my God. I actually...
It'd be worse than the Roosters Storm era.
Well, it would be pretty much the same thing. Like, it'd be... Like, without a third team in there, you know... So, I mean, obviously for us, we love they won 4, but without Parramatta in there, it was kind of like... rather than being between 3 teams, it was between 2 teams, really. The interesting thing... So I tried to figure this out in terms of what it possibly could have been. And I think you can't take enough... I mean, obviously Parramatta assembled a champion side, but you've got to kind of also remember that they had a pre-champion side in the 70s, couldn't get it done, but they got it done when Jack Gibson turned up. And so I thought, okay, well, what might Jack Gibson have done? So I tried to figure out where he might have gone. And I found it interesting that in 81, the West coach was Terry Fernley. And I thought... And he did... 81, the West coach was Brian Ryan, I think, and then it was Terry Fernley took over in 82. And I thought, well, if instead of it being Terry Fernley taking over, Jack Gibson had taken over at West, they might have had a chance. They had a reasonable roster, and if he had taken over at Balmain, they might have had a chance as well. But I think I kind of agree with you guys. I don't think anyone's going to really trouble Manly, especially if my worst nightmare happened and Peter Sterling played for them. So, that's probably what would it end up with. And I mean, wouldn't rugby league history be so much less interesting if it was like a massively dominated period where, I mean, if you think about it, pretty much no one else apart from Newtown and St George would have made a grand final for that whole period. So it would have been pretty disastrous. All right, well, we're getting towards the end. We're just going to do one last, just general feel. So we can kind of go wherever we want with this one, but basically I sort of said, what would the NRL today be like without Parramatta? So maybe we'll start with Ben and Fletch first. If you guys want to give you an idea of, you can talk about how many teams there would be. You could talk about, the quality of the NRL or anything like that.
Yeah, cheers, Dave. I went a little bit different. I sort of went with Penrith wouldn't really have a rivalry with anyone. They sort of hang off our coattails, I guess, a bit to try and to drum up that sort of rivalry where we've got, Canterbury, Manly, West to a degree. So I'm not sure who Penrith's main rival would be in the competition. I think it would be a bit of a strange look. So yeah, sort of went a little bit left field there, I guess.
No, that's fine. No. That's a very interesting point. Like, it would be the whole Western Sydney landscape of the teams. There would be one less major rival for all of those teams as well. Like, for West Tigers fans, who would they be upset about? Stealing their players, as they say. Who would the Canterbury fans be upset about? Because I mean, Canterbury and Manly probably would have been bigger rivals, but Penrith. All out there by themselves, no one really paying any attention to them. That's definitely a good point. How about you, Andrew? In terms of what the NRL will be like today without Parramatta?
I've got two schools of thought on this, and the first one is without Parramatta in that Hills Northwest area is such a growing part of Sydney. There'd be such a big gap in that area. So I wonder if Parramatta doesn't come in the mid 1900s. Does someone else come in that area? Do we get a team in that region? I don't think it necessarily changes the number of fans or playing ranks or anything, but I just think it's interesting that there'd be this giant gap in Sydney where there's no team to support. It's sort of a little bit like where North Sydney was now, and you've got that lower North Shore that doesn't really have a team, but sort of has a few peripheral teams. I just find it interesting. But to me, it's sort of interesting is like, where would those people gravitate to? Would they gravitate to the Tigers now, given that they're West Tigers, or would they gravitate to Penrith? Or that to me is sort of interesting. And the other thing I think that having Parramatta around is great for fans of other teams, because we have given them so much. It's such a punching bag and so many great opportunities to make fun of someone. Like without Parramatta, you don't have people being able to make Paul Carriage jokes. You don't have people being able to make choke-a-matter or whatever, Parramatta giving up leads. All those sort of things that people like to beat up on Parramatta for. So I'm happy that we are that team that everyone gets to make fun of, because we had a successful era in the 80s, and not everyone gets to have that sort of era. So I know a lot of people on the call here weren't alive for it, and some of us who were probably don't even remember it, but it still happened, it still existed, and it's part of the team's history. So I'm happy to trade the success we've had for being everyone's punching bag at the moment, and with the knowledge that we'll get back there eventually. Hopefully this season, but I'm not going to jinx anything until the siren's over. I'm not going to predict anything.
No. We've all said that, and we're all going to stick to that. Look, I would argue in the mid 2000s that you could do the same thing to the Dragons, because I kept telling my friend who was a Dragons fan that they choked just as much as we did, but it didn't seem to matter. Everyone wanted to pick on us. Mary, what do you think the NRL would be like? Even what do you think the NRLW would be like without Parramatta?
David, I've got to say I'm really sorry. I haven't been paying attention. I've been
That's all right.
scrolling social media.
That's
and
fine.
The Panthers have just put up this video about the title defence beginning again. And I've just felt violently ill for probably the last 2 minutes. I'm not going to lie. It's actually like, I can't deal with it. So let me think. What would the competition look like without the Parramatta Eels? Go a little bit rogue on this one, David. So my view is that the NRLW, with the introduction of 4 new teams next year, is growing too quickly. So without the Parramatta Eels in the NRLW, you have 1 less team, and potentially the talent is slightly more evenly distributed.
Okay, well that's an interesting thought. That's what about the men's competition? Do you think without Parramatta?
Pointless. Without Parramatta, it's pointless, David.
Okay, fair enough. That is exactly the answer that I was waiting for someone to say. It would be pointless to have the NRL without us.
What's the point?
I know. What is the point of? What's the point of it? Well, we wouldn't even talk. Elliot, without Parramatta, the NRL.
I'm going to look at more a historical context here. So I reckon Western Suburbs become a powerhouse. Balmain no longer exists. So the reason I say that is I spoke to Neil Cadigan about this a while back, earlier this year, to ask him about how did Parramatta start. And he said in the early days of the Cumberland team, which was basically a bunch of offcuts who formed out of the Western Suburbs Rugby Union Club. And they ended up, when Cumberland was dissolved, they ended up feeding into the Western Suburbs Magpies. And for a long time, Parramatta's junior base, all the Cumberland teams, the local teams, they all fed into the Western Suburbs catchment throughout the 20s and even into the 30s. And it wasn't until Jack Argent tried to get a side, basically saying, look, we've got this huge patch of Western Sydney where all these junior players are and there's no senior team, we need a senior club. So he tried to get us into the competition in the mid-30s, and it was denied, and the Second World War happened, and then he returned, and we were successful. So I reckon without us, Western Suburbs end up with that entire catchment, and they become a true Western Sydney team. And with all those extra players, and with guys like Ray Price and Eric Groth and all our legends of the 80s going to play for Western Suburbs, they become the powerhouse team of the competition. And because of that extra support, their ability to get larger gates, their ability to recruit bigger name players, they end up being in a much better financial position when the Super League war rolls around. They're not amalgamated with Balmain, and Balmain end up being one of the casualties, similar to North Sydney, where they might have tried a merger with Norths, to try and keep two foundation teams in the competition. But in the end, they work out that, trying to squeeze in a team that covers such a small geographical footprint doesn't work. And yeah, we end up with a gigantic Western Suburbs Magpies team that ends up winning a lot more than it should have, and never ends up amalgamating and is remaining in the competition to today.
Wow, so all you people who were going to be Wests fans, it would have worked out really well for you. Except you would have known there was a hole in your heart missing a blue and gold section. But okay. How about you, Jono? The NRL without Parramatta.
Yeah, I mean, the only thing I'd add to what everyone said was perhaps, the Western Suburbs and Balmain would never have merged, and North Sydney would still be around, I guess, because as was mentioned there, I think by Andrew, that the Hills district kind of like bleeds into northern parts of Sydney, and maybe that they would have taken that area, and there was that side of Victoria Road that Balmain could have gained strength from, and then obviously Western Suburbs is a pretty broad concept, so that they could have remained a bit stronger and sort of never had to be forced to merge. So that's the only thing I can think of.
Yeah, that's an interesting one. I think what a lot of you guys said about, Newtown might have won an 81, might have survived. Newtown were trying to move into that Campbelltown area as well, and that maybe without Parramatta they win that premiership. They have the extra money. They don't. The whole problem was they were getting excluded and they couldn't fight back because they didn't have any money. But if they'd won, they might have had that extra money to fight back, so they might have never got excluded. Also, if there's no Parramatta, then we would have only had 13 teams, not 14 anyway. So they might have just tried to delete one rather than two. So it could have even been the West got deleted. Newtown stayed around as Campbelltown Newtown, or just became the Campbelltown Jets. So, that Western Sydney powerhouse might have ended up being Balmain might have taken some of Parramatta, and Penrith might have inched a bit closer, and this, Jets team might have got the rest of it. So, and then once, the other thing too is, obviously you guys, a few of you mentioned Super League as well. With that Parramatta, there was a point there where whichever way Parramatta went was whichever comp was going to survive, and Parramatta stayed with the RL, and that's kind of meant that they survived in a way. So, the NRL probably, or the ARL probably would have folded, and we'd have Super League, and we'd probably be really big in China right now, apparently. So, it's very hard to answer. Like, if you take a whole team out of the competition, it depends on whether someone else comes back, whether someone else replaces them, or they're just not there. So, very difficult to know. I think that's all the questions that I had. Does anyone have any other comments apart from Mary wanting to say how much she hates the Panthers?
That the Super League thing was interesting. I reckon News Limited would have created a Parramatta side if there wasn't one. They would have seen that as a way to occupy all of Western Sydney, given they managed to get the Penrith to flip. Had they taken Parramatta as well, or created a Parramatta-based side, they could very well have ended up with all of Western Sydney, which might have been fairly lucrative in terms of getting a real working class supporter base that wasn't some offshoots of some basically franchise ideas in a state that they would have had somewhere. They would have had probably two very strong clubs in the heart of Western Sydney to base a lot of their strategy around.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. That sort of to me when you started mentioning that would have replaced the Mariners. I think that would have been a better solution for them to have that second Western Sydney team rather than trying to get a foothold in the Newcastle heartland. I think that would have been exactly what would have happened.
All right. Well, I thank you all for joining me, and I think we can all conclude that the NRL would be much different if it didn't have Parramatta, and I think we all agree that it wouldn't be great. And I think maybe the last thing that I can add is that I believe that probably of the six of us, I'd imagine less than half of us would be, as I would say, in rugby league media. Like, we're all in some part of rugby league media. Obviously, what Mary was talking about, she may not have started a Ladies Who League without it. I'd imagine a few of us wouldn't have had as strong of a feeling about rugby league to to create podcasts, create magazines, anything that we do. You know, and we might have had to go without all of your content. So I think that everyone should celebrate Parramatta. Everyone who enjoys listening to, you know, my insane ramblings, enjoys, you know, Ben and Fletch, enjoys the great stats of the eye test, enjoys Mary, you know, and all the content that she provides, you know, Progressive Rugby League and everything you provide, and obviously, you know, the One-Eyed Eel and Rugby League Monthly. So I just want to thank you guys for giving me your time, and I'll let you get on with what you're doing, but let's all celebrate, and let's hopefully come home with a title in the next 100 years.
Go Para!
Go the Eels.
Thanks, David.
Yes, thanks for having us. I appreciate the time.